This is William from Intellidrone Studio. Today we are going to share insights on a job we recently made in the Canary Island. We are going to talk about equipment, camera settings, issues and much more. So if you haven't seen the video yet, I suggest you follow the overlay link and watch it now. Well then, before anything else, I want to give you a bit of background on why we filmed this short video. The general idea was to produce a number of high quality work to add to our portfolio. And in the sequence we are about to talk, we wanted to show our potential customers our skills in tracking a vehicle at a relatively high speed while producing smooth and cinematic camera movements, but also to demonstrate what kind of video quality is achievable with our Inspire 2 drone system. Now, our setting is of course the desert. We were in Lanzarote and we had a classic Jeep model, so it looked like a perfect match. Plus the desert is deserted, so no buildings, no one to piss off, no additional permits to ask, as we flew in uncontrolled airspace. But it wasn't as easy as one might think, because the desert came with a big problem, the dust of course. Trillions of microscopic little rocks flying everywhere, contaminating our equipment. But we'll talk about this in just a bit. We filmed the entire aerial footage with the Inspire 2 and the Zenmuse X5S with the stock lens, while for a few scenes we also used the Olympus 25mm because we wanted to take advantage of the lens compression effect to better concentrate on the subject. Inside the vehicle we used the GH5S for the side shots, while a GoPro Hero 7 Black for the backseat shots. The footage from the GoPro is of course the weakest of the lot because it is a highly compressed 8-bit footage and the standard profile on full auto doesn't like the grading very much. Why I didn't use the flat profile? Well, because unfortunately I decided on getting a GoPro the day before leaving and I didn't really have the time to experiment with the little camera so much. So I preferred not to mess with it and let it do its own things. It is very likely that with a flat profile I could have gotten a slightly better results. The J5S on the contrary produced a great vlog file in 10-bit 422 all intra. It graded very nicely and it was extremely simple to match with the Inspire 2 footage, which was also recorded in a log profile, ProRes 422 HQ. The Zenmuse shutter speed was set a 100th of a second, twice of what I would normally use because I found out that it gives a sharper image when the drone isn't in perfectly synchro with the car speed. Believe me, perfectly matching the car speed while flying very closely to the vehicle, especially if there's an off-road on level terrain, it's not an easy task, so bumping up the shutter speed helps a lot in my opinion, and if you don't overdo it, no one will notice. Anyway, because the sun was so strong, we had to use ND filters both on the Zenmuse and the GH5S, ranging from 3 to 4 stops of light reduction. My favorite ND filters brand is Format High-Tech. They produce extremely high quality glasses, probably the best on the market. They are not cheap, but if you are serious about your image quality, they are well worth it. The main reason why I use Format High-Tech filters is because they are truly neutral even when you go very high with density. Let me show you the exact same piece of glass that I use on the Zenmuse. Okay, this is it. I used a 46mm in diameter and 4 stops in density. As you see, the price is pretty steep, but because the quality is so high and they have no color cast, I'll keep coming back. This specific model is also super slim. It's only 5.5mm thin, and because it's very lightweight, it won't have a negative effect on the camera balance. Now I'll show you a few examples on how we expose for the desert and the car, and also talk about the color grading. Because the car is the main subject in this video, I wanted it to look as gorgeous as possible. And also the car bodywork is extremely reflective and it is very easily to overexpose and lose details. This is why I expose most of the sequences this way. Now, look at the curve in the histogram. Because the sun is high in the sky, the scene is pretty evenly lit with very little or no shadows and highlights. It is concentrated roughly in the middle. Just remember that we are exposing for a vlog profile, so our bottom limit will be 20 IRI, while the upper limit will be 80 IRI. Anyway, it is never a good idea to reach these values unless you are using a true cinema camera that costs in the tens of thousands, because being the very bottom and top limits, you are pushing the cheap camera sensor and electronics of your equipment and colors start to shift, and believe me, that's not pretty. So as a general rule, I try to keep my minimum exposure level about 25 IRI and my maximum exposure level about 75 IRI. This way I know my image will always look good. Now back to the subject. In the beginning of this sequence, as we say, the curve is concentrated here in the middle, but when the Jeep enters, the histogram changes dramatically. As you can see, now we have shadows. Oh, sorry. Here we have the shadows, we have a bit of highlight. While we skim through the file, we can see, okay, right here, again we have the shadows and we have a bit of highlights corresponding to these shines over here. So because I kept the curve in the middle, I have enough overhead to also expose for the car bodywork, and every detail is captured just precisely. This is the final image graded. We can skim through it again. Now we open up the histogram and we see that the histogram now goes from 0 IRI to 100 IRI because we are in a standard profile, and you can see that the curve is pretty well contained within the limits, and overall the exposure is extremely good. In this other sequence the reasoning is the same, even though the car is way closer. Okay, now look at the car hood, how much detail I was able to capture. Wait, let me zoom in a little bit. I'm going to 100%. Okay. See how the hood is perfectly exposed, besides the little shine here and here, but that's more than okay. Every little detail is perfect. You can see just about everything. As I said, gorgeous. Let's see the histogram. Okay. Here you can see the curve that's going from about 5 RI to 95 RI. As I said before, we never want to reach the upper limit, 100 RI, and the lower limit, 0 RI. Let's talk about the color grading now. Because I'm not a colorist, I wanted to keep it simple. So at first I thought maybe I could use the official Panasonic LUTs for the Varicam that suits so well on the GH5 and the GH5S, but I was getting mixed results with the ZenMuse footage, so I decided to do it manually, emulating the look of the Golden One LUT from this page. Let me show you. Okay, outdoor. This is the Golden One. I chose this kind of look because, in my opinion, it gives a little bit of vintage mood to the scenes, and the Jeep being a vintage model, in the end I guess it's just a matter of personal taste. Other people may have different opinions, of course. Anyway, back to the sliders. To emulate that look, I simply modified a little bit the highlights here, the midtones here. It's very simple, so I'm not going to go in depth about this kind of color modification. This is a comparison between the GH5S and the ZenMuse. As you can see, the colors are pretty consistent. As in many scenes we had to fly very close to the car and the drone was in sport mode all the time, we needed fast enough camera movements. We mainly used one gimbal profile for all the sequences, and here you have the settings to try it for yourself and eventually tweak them to your liking. In this specific scene we needed a faster camera movement because the car was running in the opposite direction and the physical space for the ZenMuse to cover was much bigger. It travels about 150 degrees. We planned this shot in this way because moving the camera in the opposite direction of the drone creates a false sense of speed with the background spinning. Unfortunately, we could not afford to plan many fast action scenes and stunts or to go extremely fast with the car because we didn't have a professional driver, the car was not sponsored, it belonged to a private, and we needed to bring it back in one piece, so we had to make the best out of the situation. While the video might not look like it's something very complicated to film, indeed it was for two main reasons. One that I underestimated and the other one I could not foresee. Anyway, this really slowed down the production. The dust, as I mentioned, was a real problem. In the beginning, I thought that the stock lens, being a prime lens with not zoom, would have had no issues, but I was wrong. I have no idea how it happened because the optics inside the body lens are glued together, and I was horrified to see that many dust particles had infiltrated in between. In the end, I had to send the lens back to DJI. When working in dusty environments, I use the rubber seal provided in the box. Check that's being properly mounted, that's not deformed or loose, or particles will sneak inside. Mine was probably a bit old and I should have replaced it. For incompatible lenses, my advice is to use some kind of plastic material to envelop the body lens and seal it with some gaffer tape. On YouTube there are a few tutorials on how to do that, and I strongly suggest that you do that before working on a job with a lot of dust involved. As if that wasn't enough, after each and every time I landed the drone, the ND filter was covered with dust and I had to carefully clean it. I used a simple air blower to remove most of the particles, and then I gently wiped the glass, trying to avoid excessive pressure because this kind of dust is very abrasive. After each filming session I also had to wipe off the drone, blow the motors and the propeller clamps to avoid potential failures. This is another very important thing to keep in mind when dealing with heavy dust contamination on the set. Another issue with the dust is that the car raised quite a cloud while hovering in the desert, and this made seeing the drone very difficult at times, having to rely only on the screen and the FPV camera only. Anyway, the biggest problem we encountered was definitely the wind. Even though it wasn't the wind season yet, for 5 to 6 days we couldn't fly because it was blowing so strong, ranging from 13 to 30 knots, and at times it was very difficult to keep the drone steady because the wind would just throw it, of course, making even the simplest of the scenes quite a challenge. The sequence was maybe the trickiest because we had to keep the drone movement as synchronized as possible with the car to avoid collision, while also maintaining the drone close to the ground. The wind was blowing so fiercely towards the vehicle that my maneuver at this point became a little too close. But of course I was able to keep the drone from colliding, but I had to steer so that the sequence lost its smoothness, and I had to cut short a chase that was really meant to be a bit longer. In this other scene where the drone simply flies straight forward at full speed, well, you cannot see it, but right in this point the terrain has a depression and the wind would blow upwards, effectively making the drone billow up and down, even though I was compensating. In the end, I guess this kind of video could have not been filmed with anything else than a dual operator drone and with a bit of guts and experience. So my final advice for those who want to chase vehicles with drones and produce close-up cinematic images, well, first, don't do it with a single operator drone because you're going to take a big risk. You either watch the drone or you watch the screen, and I don't have to tell you what the consequences might be. Even if you don't have an Inspire 2 to work with, at least have a second remote and a friend to control the axis of the gimbal and to tell you what's happening on the screen, how fast or slow you need to go, telemetry, and if your drone doesn't allow for a second remote, well, sorry, you are out of luck. Second, check the wind forecast. Even though with a big drone like the Inspire 2, wind does matter. You need to understand your limits and the drone ones. Third, prepare yourself, train your camera operator, study the terrain, plan the maneuvers you want to perform, and if you got the chance, test them out before actually diving into the job. By the way, one of the upcoming videos that we are going to publish in the next weeks will talk about how to train a camera operator without breaking the bank. Okay, this is it for today. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful and interesting. In the upcoming months we are going to break down more jobs, we'll talk again about the Inspire 2 system, we are going to review the multilink and much more, so stay tuned!